Okay, let's really get into this. Think about a world completely engineered for, well, perfect stability, where things like discomfort, pain, even really deep emotions are just gone.
Right. Eliminated.
Yeah, a society where, on the surface, everyone seems happy, but, and this is the big but, it comes at this huge cost. They get rid of family, art, history, philosophy, individual freedom as we'd recognize it.
Everything that makes life messy, unpredictable.
Exactly. So the question is that engineered contentment, that kind of manufactured bliss, is it really worth sacrificing what we think of as our basic humanity?
It's the central tension, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And that's the core of Aldous Huxley's incredible, often chilling novel, Brave New World. So today we're doing a deep dive into this classic. Our goal really is to explore the societal structures Huxley dreamed up, understand the main conflicts he sets up.
Look at the characters, too, how they represent different ideas.
Yes, exactly. And analyze his critiques of progress, maybe unchecked progress, look at the prophecies that still feel so relevant today, and unpack all that powerful symbolism he uses.
And we're digging into the source material you've provided, pulling out the most sort of important insights, the key details, to help navigate this really complex vision. This dive is for you, listening, to guide you through the ideas and find those crucial bits of knowledge.
Okay, let's start right at the foundation. This world state. It gets called a utopia sometimes, but it's built on this radical control, starting even before anyone's born. What are the basic principles driving it all?
Well, fundamentally, it boils down to one thing: stability. Absolute, unwavering stability. That's the prime directive. Everything, every process, every social rule is designed to stamp out anything that could cause conflict or unhappiness or, individual weirdness that might rock the boat.
And they don't just hope for stability, they engineer it. With methods that are, frankly, pretty disturbing. It doesn't start with families having kids. Oh no. It's industrial. Manufacturing humans in these places called hatcheries and conditioning centers. The level of detail in the sources about this process is clinical.
Yes, it really is. It starts with surgically removed ovaries, kept alive artificially. Then they draw off the eggs, inspect them meticulously, count them, transfer them. The fertilization part, it's all external in labs.
Right, not natural at all.
No. The text mentions immersing them in this warm bouillon containing free-swimming spermatozoa. They even specify the concentration needed, like 100,000 per cubic centimeter.
Wow.
Yeah, and they might do it multiple times if the first doesn't take. Then the fertilized eggs go back into incubators. It's pure process.
And right there, that's where the biological hierarchy, the caste system, begins. Alphas and betas, they get the premium treatment, right? The best possible prenatal care, staying in their bottles for the whole 9 months, so to speak.
That's right. But for the lower castes, the gammas, deltas, and epsilons, it's a whole different path. They're taken out much sooner, just 36 hours in, for that infamous procedure, Buchanovsky's process.
Ah, yes, Bokanovsky. That sounds sinister just saying it.
It is. It's the key to mass production. The course describes how it makes it possible to get up to 96 identical twins out of a single egg. Basically, they shock the egg so it buds, and buds again and again.
96 from one egg.
Up to 96. The aim is total standardization, creating identical people for identical jobs. Standardized machine minders for standardized machines, as the text puts it. And they compound this by using eggs from just a few mothers to get, massive batches of uniform individuals.
So it's not just making babies, it's manufacturing widgets. Human widgets. And the prenatal treatment doesn't stop there, does it? The embryos are grown on a bed of peritoneum, fed rich blood surrogate, bumped full of chemicals like placentin and thyroxine, corpus luteum extract, even pituitary hormones in increasing doses.
There's even this whole artificial maternal circulation system, described a reservoir, a pump, a synthetic lung, a waste filter, all inside the bottle. They actively treat problems like potential anemia with stuff like massive doses of hog stomach extract and fetal foal's liver.
Good grief.
Yeah. The detail really drives home that this isn't about nurturing life. It's pure biological manufacturing, managing raw materials in a factory.
And the logical outcome of all this industrial reproduction is the complete elimination of the family unit. Words like family and home are literally obscene, smutty words.
Exactly. The world state views family life as inherently dangerous, full of appalling dangers. There's that quote about the past. The world was full of fathers, was therefore full of misery, full of mothers, therefore of every kind of perversion from sadism to chastity, full of brothers, sisters, uncles, aunts, full of madness and suicide.
So get rid of the family, get rid of all that emotional messiness, the unpredictable loyalties, the potential for conflict.
Right. You eliminate a huge source of instability, and crucially, you redirect all loyalty towards the state itself. It's total social engineering.
And then you have the caste system and the conditioning to lock it all in place. 5 castes, alphas on top, then betas, gammas, deltas, and epsilons at the bottom. We mentioned the prenatal stuff, setting the biological stage.
Yeah. Deliberately making the lower castes inferior, treating them prenatally with alcohol and other protein poisons, so they end up almost subhuman, but perfectly capable of and content with doing the unskilled labor.
And then comes the postnatal conditioning. Hypnopedia, sleep teaching is the big one everyone remembers.
It is. Though, interestingly, the sources point out it failed for actual learning, for intellectual stuff, because apparently intellectual activity is incompatible with sleep. Who knew?
Huh. Okay, so what did it work for?
For moral training, for embedding behaviors and attitudes through suggestion when people are most receptive, half asleep. The description is so vivid, the suggestions are like drops of liquid sealing wax dripping onto the mind until the child's mind is these suggestions, and the sum of these suggestions is the child's mind.
And not just the child's mind.
No, the adult's mind, too. The mind that judges and desires and decides made up of these suggestions. It's deep conditioning.
And crucially, these suggestions are from the state. They hammer home caste consciousness, making everyone happy with their lot. Lenino's thought process is a perfect example. I suppose epsilons don't really mind being epsilons.
Right, and Henry reinforces it immediately. Of course they don't. How can they? They don't know what it's like being anything else. He adds that if they were epsilons, their conditioning would make them just as thankful not to be alphas or betas. It ensures contentment through engineered ignorance and repetition.
It's a psychological cage, really. And they also use neo-Pavlovian conditioning, right? Straight-up behaviorism.
Yes. The source mentions it being so acute, it basically stops people from thinking critically about their lives. It's about creating visceral, automatic responses, associating things the state dislikes like, say, books or nature, with unpleasant stimuli, maybe loud noises or shocks for infants, creating an ingrained aversion. It works hand in glove with the sleep teaching.
So you end up with this perfectly stable society built on manufactured biology, no families, rigid castes, and conditioning from cradle to, well, not grave, but recycling center maybe.
Something like that.
Right.
And all designed for contentment.
Which takes us right to that central clash. This engineered happiness versus what we think of as freedom. The world state chooses happiness, or rather contentment, over liberty. It's an explicit trade-off.
And it has huge consequences. Critical thinking just evaporates. The sources say people can't think of their existence outside of the camp. They function robotically. Everything is superficial. Deep emotions, real love, real hate, intense joy or sadness, they're basically rendered obsolete. Too messy, too destabilizing.
This brings up that key comparison with Orwell's 1984. The source material highlights this distinction really clearly.
Yeah, it's a classic comparison. In 1984, control comes through pain, fear, scarcity. Big Brother controls by inflicting pain.
But in Brave New World,
it's the opposite. Control comes through pleasure, through endless comfort, distraction, gratification. They control by inflicting pleasure.
And the number one tool for inflicting that pleasure, for smoothing over any possible ripple of discontent, is soma.
Ah, soma, the miracle drug. It's presented as perfect, isn't it?
Yeah.
A small dose gives you a sense of bliss, a bit more, and you see visions. Take 3 tablets and you get refreshing sleep.
And the kicker, no physiological or mental cost, no hangover, no side effects.
Exactly. It's the ultimate escape. It lets people take holidays from their black moods or just the familiar annoyances of everyday life. Any little frustration, any hint of sadness, just pop a soma and it disappears.
But it's so much more than just a personal pick-me-up. The sources really stress its political function.
Oh, absolutely. Soma was not a private vice. It was a political institution. It's described almost like a constitutional right, the very essence of the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness in their world. It's social glue, an insurance against personal maladjustment, social unrest, and the spread of subversive ideas.
The parallel with religion is fascinating, that line. Religion, Karl Marx declared, is the opium of the people. In the Brave New World, this situation was reversed. Opium, or rather soma, was the people's religion.
It performs similar functions, doesn't it? It has the power to console and compensate. It calls up visions of another, better world, offers hope, strengthened faith, and promoted charity. It provides a kind of meaning, but it's a shallow, chemically induced meaning, all within the state's approved boundaries.
And you see people using it constantly. Linena convinces Bernard to take it, and suddenly roots and fruits were abolished. The flower of the present rosily blossomed. Linda, John's mother, basically spends her final days lost in a Soma holiday, infinitely far away.
Even that reporter character dismisses suffering entirely. Evil's an unreality if you take a couple of grams, pain's a delusion. It just wipes away any engagement with difficult reality.
And this idea, this chemical control, it feels disturbingly relevant now, doesn't it? The sources connect it directly to our time.
They do. They talk about our own proclivity for drug use, even and especially prescribed drug use, and how that, combined with the instant gratification of the internet age, feels very close to the dystopia Huxley describes.
It makes you think about the potential dangers of a drug that can make people feel happy in situations where they would normally feel miserable.
Right. It sounds like a blessing on one level, but the source warns it's fraught with grave political dangers. Imagine a dictator using such a drug to make people accept things they really shouldn't accept, to reconcile them to oppression. That, quote, mightier than either the pen or the sword is the pill really hits hard. It's about achieving totalitarianism without force, just chemically induced compliance.
So we have this vision of the world state. Engineered babies, conditioning, soma happiness, and then the novel throws this sharp contrast at us. The savage reservation.
The reservation is like the negative image of the world state. It's nature, tradition, uncontrolled life, dirt, disease, suffering, but also maybe something more authentic. It's what the world state escaped or suppressed.
Linda's experience there is brutal, giving birth naturally horrifying to world state citizens. And that whipping scene, John witnesses.
Yeah, women holding her down, another hitting her with a whip. It's raw, violent social punishment, completely unlike the world state's subtle conditioning or soma-induced calm. Linda gets called names, boys sing cruel songs. That's real social pain, not something fixed by a pill.
And her experience with mezcal, which Popeye calls soma.
But it's not soma. It made you feel ill afterwards. It had consequences. It wasn't the perfect escape. It was a flawed, real-world substance, unlike the consequence-free fantasy of soma.
The reservation is also where culture, real culture, still exists. Linda teaches John to read, and he discovers Shakespeare. That knowledge becomes his framework for understanding the world.
And it's a framework utterly alien to the world state. His Shakespearean references, maybe implicitly linked to things like the Bible too, just highlight the massive cultural and emotional vacuum in the supposedly advanced civilization. They've thrown out the baby with the bathwater, you could say.
So the contrast is clear. Engineered, superficial happiness versus a life with unbridled experiences, including suffering. The source material suggests that this suffering, however awful, is tied to vital curiosity and inquiry to being human, even to the basic possibility to choose to be sad.
Can you really appreciate joy if you've never known sadness? Can you truly love if you can't feel loss? These are the questions the reservation and John force us to ask.
And these questions play out through the main characters. They really aren't just people. They kind of represent different responses to this world. Bernard Marx is a good place to start.
Bernard. He's an alpha-plus, so he should be on top of the world. But he's not. He feels like an outsider, terribly queer, partly because he's physically smaller than other alphas. There was supposedly alcohol in his blood surrogate by mistake.
Right, so he has this built-in reason to feel different, and it translates into a kind of intellectual dissatisfaction.
Yeah, he's uncomfortable with the norms. He finds Leonard's casual talk about sex unsettling, feels choked with confusion in crowds. The director even pulls him aside, warns him about his nonconformist behavior outside work, reminding him that alphas are conditioned not to be infantile emotionally, but they still have a duty to fit in, or face the consequences, like being sent to Iceland.
But his rebellion, it feels a bit self-serving sometimes, doesn't it? Like, it's more about his own insecurity than a deep philosophical objection, at least initially.
That's a fair point. When the director threatens him, his reaction is pure personal rage and fear. Iceland, Iceland.
Yeah.
He wants attention, maybe respect he feels he doesn't get. His discontent is real, but maybe not purely ideological. It does, however, make him open to someone like John.
Then there's Lenina Crown. She seems like the poster child for world state conditioning.
Totally. She embodies the values, especially the sexual norms. Promiscuity is encouraged, sex is just, recreation, mechanical sexual relations, the source calls them. And Lenina genuinely believes her conditioning is great. I'm glad I'm not an epsilon, she thinks, showing that ingrained caste superiority. Her life seems very routine, very surface-level rockets, vibro vacuums, synthetic music.
But even she gets thrown off balance sometimes. Bernard's desire for quiet and conversation just makes her say, "How funny you are." She reaches for Soma pretty quickly when things get even slightly awkward. Half a gram had been enough.
And her frustration when Bernard initially resists her advances is telling. Her friend Fanny basically tells her to just take him, whether he wants it or no, because that's how it works. Act, don't think or feel too much.
Her clash with John over love and sex is huge. When he starts quoting Shakespeare at her while she's taking her clothes off.
Right. The description of her clothes, the ripped blouse, the trousers, the zipper semantics, while he's talking about eternal love. It perfectly captures the chasm between his worldview and her conditioning. She literally cannot compute his idea of romance. For her, it's just about the physical act right now.
Which brings us to John, the savage. He's really the anchor for traditional human values in the story.
Absolutely. His identity is shaped by the reservation and, crucially, by Shakespeare. His constant quoting isn't just a character quirk, it's the language of deep emotion, of history, of complex morality, everything the world state lacks. When he calls Lenita the top of admiration or talks about eternity in lips and eyes.
It's beautiful, but totally meaningless to her.
Exactly. He even grapples with his own desires using Shakespeare, like the strongest oaths are straw to the fire and the blood, showing this internal conflict that world state citizens just don't have, or rather are conditioned not to have.
His whole story is tragic, isn't it? He can't fit into the reservation fully because of his mother, and he definitely can't fit into the world state. He's caught between two worlds, belonging to neither.
His despair is palpable. He finds the superficiality, the lack of meaning, the instant gratification just unbearable. And his end, retreating to the lighthouse, trying to purify himself through self-flagellation.
Which becomes a public spectacle.
Right. The helicopters arrive, reporters filming. How did they know about the whip? It shows the utter inability of the world state to understand or respect privacy, suffering, or spiritual struggle. They turn his pain into entertainment, which ultimately drives him over the edge. He can't escape either world.
Mustafa Mond. He's fascinating. A world controller who knows everything that's forbidden.
He's complex because he understands what's been lost. He's read Shakespeare. He knows history. He represents the rationale behind the world state. He argues quite articulately that stability and universal happiness are worth sacrificing truth, beauty, art, science, religion, deep emotions.
He made the choice himself.
He did. He understands the value of those things, but believes the price of keeping them instability, misery, conflict is too high. He embodies the cold utilitarian calculation. The greatest happiness, or rather contentment, for the greatest number, even if it means stripping away much of what we might consider makes life worth living. It's a chillingly pragmatic perspective from the top.
And briefly, Helmholtz Watson, Bernard's friend, also an Alpha Plus.
Helmholtz is brilliant, an intellectual brilliance, the source mentions. He's a lecturer, a writer of state propaganda. But like Bernard, he's dissatisfied.
But for different reasons, right?
Yes. Bernard's issues are more social, psychological. Helmholtz feels intellectually stifled. He has this longing for deeper expression, a sense that he could create something meaningful, something real, but the society has no place for it. His experiments with emotional poetry are seen as bizarre, subversive. He's alienated because his mind is too big for the tiny box the world state allows.
These characters really illuminate the novel's critique of progress, especially scientific and technological progress run amok.
Definitely. The book is a powerful warning about science used without ethics, without considering the human cost, the biological engineering, the conditioning. It's science applied purely for social control and stratification, not for, say, alleviating suffering in a way that enhances freedom.
Although, as you mentioned, one source suggests it's not purely anti-modernity. It sees a future where utopia and dystopia coexist through technology.
That's true. It's perhaps more a critique of the application of technology, the priorities chosen. When efficiency and control become the only goals, humanity gets lost. Science used to eliminate problems might end up eliminating the human spirit too.
And to maintain that control, they have to actively suppress things like history, art, literature, independent thought.
Because those things are dangerous to the system. They encourage critical thinking, connect people to a past that contradicts the state's narrative, and expose them to the full spectrum of human experience, including suffering and questioning all things that threaten engineered contentment.
Which brings us back to that great comparison with Orwell.
Right. What Orwell feared were those who would ban books. What Huxley feared was that there would be no reason to ban a book, for there would be no one who wanted to read one.
It's suppression by saturation, not just censorship.
Exactly. Drowning truth in a sea of irrelevance. giving people so much distraction, so much superficial entertainment that they lose the appetite or even the capacity for depth. Orwell feared those who would deprive us of information. Huxley feared that those would give us so much that we would be reduced to passivity and egoism. It's a different kind of control, maybe even more insidious.
And this connects directly to one of the most prescient aspects, genetic engineering and eugenics.
The world state is fundamentally eugenic, creating castes, ensuring biological superiority for some and inferiority for others through prenatal treatments like Bokanovsky's process and chemical interventions. Using ova from a limited number of mothers for uniformity, it's textbook positive and negative eugenics aimed at designing a population.
The sources define eugenics historically, the science of improving stock, aiming for noble qualities, mentioning Galton.
And they briefly touch on some grim historical examples, Nazi policies, Spartan practices, but also things like historical preferences for certain traits in musicians, or even ideas in Latin America about improving populations through environmental means. It has a complex, often dark history.
But the real alarm bells ring when the sources connect it to today. Modern genetics potentially being a backdoor to eugenics.
Especially through technologies like PGD, pre-implantation genetic diagnosis. The concern raised is that this becomes consumer-driven and market-based, treating children like made-to-order consumer products. The UN Bioethics Committee's warning about challenging human equality and creating new forms of discrimination is noted.
Yet the sources also present the other side, the ethical complexities around parental choice.
They do. They pose questions like, is choosing eye color or a propensity for math genetically really so different from choosing to teach a child religion or push them towards sports? One view presented is that no moral principle seems to provide sufficient reason to condemn individual eugenic goals, and asks, what exactly is wrong with parents choosing to use genetic knowledge to improve the health and well-being of their offspring?
But with important caveats.
Yes, crucial caveats mentioned in the source material, like the absence of coercion and force, and ensuring fairness in the access to the means. It's presented as a really tricky ethical area, and it's important we represent those different viewpoints impartially, just laying out what the sources discuss.
Absolutely. And discussing this just highlights again how Brave New World, written way back in 1932, feels like it could have been written yesterday.
It's uncanny, isn't it? The sources call it eerily prescient and absolutely still relevant in so many ways.
Consumerism is a massive one. Huxley saw it coming, the need for constant consumption, the sophisticated arts of selling, manipulating unconscious desires and fears, using irrationality for profit. That phrase, capitalism is dead, consumerism is king, feels spot on.
And the constant distractions, mass entertainment. The source talks about non-stop distractions, threatening to drown us in a sea of irrelevance, or almost infinite appetite for distractions. Huxley's feelies, orgy-porgy, centrifugal bumblepuffy. They're just earlier versions of our endless entertainment streams, maybe, designed to keep us pacified.
Pharmaceuticals, soma is the big one, obviously, but the sources link it to modern tranquilizer use, how people learn to resort to them in every predicament, and the chilling potential for future drugs to make people happy with unacceptable situations, enabling that nonviolent totalitarianism, the idea that the pill could be mightier than the pen or the sword.
They even mention research into psychic energizers or drugs to normalize higher nervous activity, and contrast these chemical approaches with older self-control techniques used by ascetics, or the use of substances like peyote or LSD for altered states. It's a broad look at chemical influence.
Genetic manipulation, which we just covered, the potential for consumer-driven eugenics echoing the world state.
And the concentration of power. Over-organization. The sources warn about vast impersonal forces making for the centralization of power and a regimented society. How big government and big business possess the techniques for mind manipulation. The fear of an over-organized world imposing social and cultural uniformity.
Leading to that potential new kind of nonviolent totalitarianism that looks free on the surface but isn't.
Yeah, maintaining the liberal forms but controlled by a hidden ruling oligarchy.
And overpopulation is mentioned as a driving factor too. The pressure of increasing numbers, straining resources, making centralized control seem like a necessary evil.
It all paints a picture where Huxley wasn't just writing science fiction. He was extrapolating trends he saw in the 30s with frightening accuracy. It really does resonate with the present age.
Going back to that Orwell-Huxley comparison one last time, the pain versus pleasure distinction is key.
Right. 1984 is bleak, cruel and ruthless, materially falling apart, Brave New World looks shiny and comfortable on the surface. The physical world is much better. But the sources argue it might be even more eternally hopeless because freedom is lost internally, engineered out from the start.
Their fears were opposite sides of the same coin, weren't they? Orwell feared lack, Huxley feared excess. Orwell feared censorship, Huxley feared no one wanting to read. Orwell feared truth hidden, Huxley feared truth drowned.
And that disturbing thought from the source material, that maybe we today might look at the world state and see aspects of paradise that suggests Huxley was perhaps more correct than Orwell, that we might be more easily controlled by our desires for comfort and pleasure than by fear and pain. That's a sobering thought.
It really is. And the novel leaves us grappling with these huge, timeless questions about human nature as suffering necessary for depth, for meaning. The sources talk about being deprived of humanity, lacking curiosity, losing the possibility to choose to be sad. Is that trade-off worth it?
And about how we organize society. Can you really have stability and happiness if you crush freedom and individuality? That idea that someone's utopia is someone else's dystopia is crucial, plus the inherent dangers of too much centralized power.
And about perfection itself. Is chasing some idea of a damn near perfect civilization worth it if the cost is dehumanization?
These questions are embedded everywhere, especially in the symbolism Huxley uses.
Like the conditioning center. It's not just a building, it's a symbol of the whole industrial approach to life, manufacturing humans instead of nurturing them.
And Bokanowski's process, the ultimate symbol of mass production, obliterating individuality. 96 identical cogs for the social machine.
Ford worship. Replacing God with the assembly line. Efficiency, technology, consumerism as the highest values. The T instead of the cross, AF dating, our Ford or our Freud. It's all there.
Even the solidarity service, that forced ritualistic gathering at the forts and community singery. It's meant to create unity but feels hollow, synthetic. It shows the superficiality of relationships, a manufactured community lacking real connection.
The savage reservation stands as the symbol of everything repressed. Nature, tradition, history, art, real emotion, pain. The wilderness, the world state paved over.
And Soma, always Soma, symbolizing chemical control, escape, fake happiness, the deliberate numbing of the human spirit, the ultimate tool to people's religion in this dystopia.
So, to wrap it all up, Brave New World gives us this vision of a society that achieves stability and a kind of happiness, but through total control, biological, psychological, cultural. It forces us, even now, and maybe especially now, to ask what we truly value. Liberty, authentic experience, deep emotion, or is guaranteed comfort and stability more important?
And the sources strongly suggest its relevance hasn't faded one bit since 1932. It feels like it speaks directly to our present age, grappling with technology, consumerism, potential genetic futures, and that ongoing tension between the needs of the collective and the freedoms of the individual.
It definitely leaves you with a lot to chew on.
Which leads to one last thought, something for you to mull over, drawing from everything we've discussed. Is the kind of happiness offered by the world state safe, stable, but stripped of deep suffering, real connection, critical thought? Is that a future we should aim for, or one we should actively resist? And maybe more pointedly, as you look at our world today, how much are we already choosing comfort, distraction, and easy escapes over the harder truths, the challenging freedoms, the messy, unpredictable, sometimes painful, but maybe more authentic human experience?